Hello everybody, Maven here, and today we are going to find out what exotic primary weapon does the most damage. We're going to be doing all our testing against the Templar boss from the Vault of Glass raid. We got a lot of insane primaries in the game right now, like we got the Touch of Malice back from the Kingsfall raid, and Bungie announced that the DMT just got a huge rate of fire buff, and like the Outbreak Perfected has always been the king of exotic primary DPS, but there's a lot of insane things, and we're going to test a lot of weapons out in today's video to compare them, see which one does the most damage in one short phase of Templar. But we're not going to test every single exotic primary in the game because there's things like the Wish Ender, the Cryosthesia, just things that we just know with common sense would not even compete. So we're not testing everything, but we're testing all of the weapons that have like a unique perk to them, some kind of unique firing pattern, such as like the Cerberus +1 or the Devil's Ruin, things that are like super unique like that, and we're going to try them all out. And this video took a ton of work to make, so if you want to help out, you can simply hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And if you are new here and you enjoy Destiny 2 PvE and PvP weapon testing and builds, then you come to the right place because we do that a lot here, so consider dropping a sub. And with that, let's get to the testing. Hope you enjoy. So we're starting things off with the buffed Dead Man's Tail at 127,000 damage. So with the changes to Dead Man's Tail, it now goes up to 180 RPM when firing from the hip when you get Cranial Spike ×5, but when it does that, you lose 20% damage. So is that RPM trade-off worth it? If any mathematicians want to let me know in the comments down below, feel free to do so. And on to the Quicksilver Storm. I really expected more out of this, especially since I started off the DPS phase with that grenade shot. And to get that grenade shot loaded, you just got to kill 2 adds, so it's really easy to proc that when you start damage. But the auto rifle mode just kind of sucks. Like, auto rifles really need a big buff in Destiny 2. And next is a Hawkmoon with a huge upset of 178,000 damage. Now, I've used Hawkmoon a lot in PvE, so I'm aware of how powerful that paracausal shot is. Sometimes it's hard to proc it, but even if you get it up to like ×4 or 5, it'll still absolutely chunk majors. Hawkmoon is really kind of a sleeper pick in PvE. And next up is a Sweet Business, and I'm surprised that it did 150k. It's actually not too bad, but I've always dissed this thing. I've always called it like the blueberry gun or the noob gun or the gym gun. It's just honestly not that fun to use, but in all honesty, it's not that terrible. And next up is the Polaris Lance matching the damage of the Quicksilver Storm. I love the Polaris Lance. I thought it would do a little bit more with that perfect 5th shot, and also the fact that it never has to reload. It's a fun weapon to use in Grandmasters and stuff, but it needs a buff. It really does need a buff. It doesn't do enough. That perfect 5th shot needs to have some kind of additional effect to it. Like, it needs to have Incandescent or something so it can apply Scorch or possibly Dragonfly. You know, it needs to do some kind of different effect to make it even worth using. Next up is the Malfeasance, and you and me both are disappointed in this. We all expected a lot more damage out of this thing, let's be real. I expected upwards of 150k. Like, I have used Malfeasance in higher level content in the past just because I was thinking, well, I gotta use a primary exotic that does a lot of damage, so I'll use the Malfeasance. Turns out I was mistaken, I was deceived the whole time, and I probably won't be using this thing much anymore. Next up is a Cerberus +1, and you might have seen that damage phase was a little bit scuffed, like, because with the Cerberus you got to get pretty close to your enemy to be able to hit all those crits, and I even had to waste a few frames to throw a healing nade. And if I did hit all crits, you know, the Cerberus might have actually done a ton of damage, like 150k, but it did 128k, which is still not bad. This thing is basically a full auto shotgun. If you're up in your opponent's face, it actually does a lot of damage, so it's not the worst option, and it's fun to use with stasis crystals. Next up is a Tommy's matchbook, and it was also a little bit scuffed. As you might have seen, I was doing a combination of hip firing and aiming down sights because I heard through the grapevine that you're supposed to hip fire the Tommy's matchbook. Apparently it just has good hip fire accuracy. I don't know if hip firing increases the damage. It didn't say anything in the text of the weapon itself that you're supposed to hip fire it, but I just heard that you're supposed to. I don't know. I never use this thing, but we still managed to do 143,000 damage, which is pretty good. But I had to go on Warlock for this because it did too much self damage, and that's one of the big downsides of this. So you can't really use it in high level content, only in like low level content like Patrol. Next up is the Osteostriga, and this is no surprise. I did expect a lot of damage out of the Osteostriga. It almost beat the Hawkmoon, but I think the reason that it did so much damage is because it was spreading poison to some of the Harpies that were underneath the Templar, and then the Harpies exploded and dealt some damage back to the Templar. So I think it got caught in a little bit of collateral damage. So maybe would have done like around 140,000. I'm not too sure, but still, the fact that it just spreads that much damage around, even though I was shooting directly at the Templar's eye, is pretty insane. The Osteostriga is just a very top tier pick for PvE. And onto the Thorn with a pathetic 88,000 damage, the first 5-digit number. I thought Weapons of Sorrow were supposed to be OP. I thought that poison damage would really rack up and do a lot, but it ended up being a complete flop. So yeah, use this thing in PvP, not in PvE. And next up, the Devil's Ruin with a massive 160,000 damage. And if you saw at the end there, I actually didn't get off the entire 4th burst. If we had just literally one more second of the damage phase available, we would have got off the entire 4th burst and probably hit like 200,000 damage. You know, with the amount of damage we did, we can assume that each entire burst does around 50,000 damage, and that last one only got a little bit of damage off and only did 10k out of that last shot. So the Devil's Ruin does a lot more damage than I expected it to, and it's a very underrated PvE weapon, especially since it has intrinsic unstoppable. It's actually quite good. And now we're on to the heavy hitters, with Vex Mythoclast hitting over 200k, the first weapon of the day to get over 200k. So we started off the DPS phase on those linear shots. I think that's not too much to ask, because all you have to do to activate that mode is kill 6 adds, and in any activity really, that's going to be a very easy thing to do, especially for this weapon. And when you use that linear mode, you're likely going to use it when you run into a major or a boss, so when the time comes, you will likely have that readily available. So it's really not too much to ask. So it's no surprise that the Vex is an amazing PvE weapon. And on to the reigning king of exotic primary DPS, the Outbreak Perfected. Now keep in mind that this was solo, and also it was in a very short amount of time. Now, when your teammates are also using Outbreak Perfected, they can help spread Siva nanites, and it's a communal thing. Everybody's Outbreak buffs each other, and assuming that you'll have a longer damage phase, it will do a lot more damage in the long run. So this is the king so far of exotic primary DPS if you're doing like a boss or something, but for just general play, I think that there's better options than the Outbreak, but this one definitely wins for DPS so far. And with only 2 weapons left in the video, next being the Touch of Malice, I decided to save the Terra buff for near the end of the video just because I knew that this thing would do ridiculous damage. Just look at this. It's insane. And it is incredibly underused. If you watch any YouTuber's YouTube video about underused exotics, the Terra buff will be in that video, I guarantee you. I've seen it happen so many times. This thing is nuts and criminally underused. And proc Ravenous Beast, you not only have to deal damage, but you can also proc it by taking damage. And so in the video you saw there of me using it, the Ravenous Beast was already procced just because the Templar was pelting me with those torch hammers and proc the Ravenous Beast perk for me. And the DPS ended up being ridiculous. So it's a pretty good thing to use if you're like out of heavy ammo. It's pretty solid, and this thing shreds majors. More so if you pair it with something like Font of Might or any kind of damage buff. And finally, the moment y'all waited for, the Touch of Malice. I saved the best for last. It hit 211,000 damage, and it's pretty good, but you have to be in a rift or a well to use it. And even in the rift, I still died in a few attempts to get this footage. Like, there's only really one place in the game that you can use the Touch of Malice, and that's in a raid boss damage phase when somebody has a well down. So I think that this weapon's very situational, and it's pretty tough to use in general play. And so in that case, I still prefer the Outbreak Perfected. I think that with our testing today, I can say that in a raid boss damage phase, if like 3 or more people were using the Outbreak, you would probably end up doing more DPS overall than the Touch would, given that the Touch has a charge with Blight debuff, and if more people use that, maybe it can up the damage, but I think that overall the Outbreak would be more consistent. And on to the wrap up, I think that we can confirm by the final results that the Outbreak Perfected wins for DPS if more people in your raid fire team are using it. However, if nobody else is using Outbreak, I would say use the Touch of Malice. However, those are very situational. So which one would you rather use for general play? We got to think about what one of these weapons has the best combination of both ad clear and damage. Now, if I was doing something like Master or Grandmaster Nightfalls, I would not even consider the Touch of Malice because that self-damage is going to be a little bit too risky to use. The Outbreak Perfected is pretty good for racking up damage on those majors in that high-level kind of content, and it's not the worst thing in the world for ad clear because if you do get a critical kill, you do get to spawn those Siva nanites that track out and kill other targets, but it has to be a precision kill, so it's not as user-friendly for ad clear, but it's still not the worst thing in the world. Now, the Devil's Ruin really surprised me because it can do insane burst damage when you run into like a major or a boss and you run out of heavy. The Devil's Ruin can still do that damage for you, but also it's a sidearm, so it's pretty decent at ad clear because it can just spray around really quickly. And it has that intrinsic unstoppable, so it can be very useful in those situations. So it's a pretty good option. But then I gotta shout out the Osteostriga because the Osteostriga does do heavy damage. You gotta be relatively close. However, it still does heavy damage and it's insane for ad clear. And if you can proc that toxic overload or whatever it's called, you can get up to like 100 in the mag and just not have to reload and just spray down majors. It's a really good option. And then we got the Teraba. Now the Teraba does do heavy damage. Like you can main it for your ad clear, and when you run into a major, you just absolutely schmelt that thing. However, it is kind of a bummer that when you stow it, it loses some of its Ravenous Beast progress, and that'll happen often because I like to eager edge skate around. You know, that's a fine trait for it to have for PvP, because it would be broken if you got to keep all your progress. But for PvE, Bungie should keep it so that you don't lose your Ravenous Beast progress when you stow it. So I think that that could be a really solid update for the weapon to possibly increase its usability, because this thing is actually pretty nuts. But I do have to crown a winner for this video, and remember, these are not facts, just opinions. This is just my own opinion, but I gotta give the top spot to Vex Mythoclast. I think that Vex Mythoclast is the perfect balance of heavy damage and ad clear, because it also has a perk that we didn't mention in this video, but it has like a invisible built-in rampage perk. When you get a kill with it, it buffs its own damage. So this thing absolutely melts through ads, has great range, and also the linear mode is so easy to activate. All you gotta do is kill 6 ads. So then when you come across a major or a boss, that's basically just free heavy shots. The Vex Mythoclast is insane. If you do not have one, get to grinding Vault of Glass. So when it's a week when the Vault of Glass is the pinnacle raid, the boss encounter is farmable. So get that CP and get to farming that all day long, and you'll surely get it. So that is my list, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and if there is an exotic that you think is better than this top 5, then let me know what would be your number 1 or your top 5 list. So thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit that like button and leave a comment down below. Those 2 actions really help the algorithm and the video's performance, and if you're new, consider subscribing. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out.